Thanks, Julian. And if it's too long, everyone, you can blame their printer. Anyway, good Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom. There are many here who have known me and have heard me speak over the last 26 years, my time at B'nai Torah. And you know that the Torah that I teach is a living and it is a breathing document. Truly, Eitz Chaim Hi. And by that, though, I mean that I cannot teach a Torah that is removed from life, from my life, from your life, from the life of our society, our culture, the life of our world. The Torah has to speak to those things that we feel most deeply and the issues that we are most concerned about. It's remarkable how frequently the Torah does just that. And for me, it's remarkable how frequently it does it at the right time. Everything I teach has to stand up to a sniff test that I learned from David Hartman. And that is, when all is said and done, we have to ask the question, what difference does it make? One of the true living elements of this literary tradition that I am amazed by is that we can find paths where the Torah speaks to us in both very deep personal ways, and it speaks to our world. It does it this week. The text which I will teach from this week's Parsha connects to the challenges that we feel in our nation over the last couple weeks. We know that the election is over, and we're all very grateful. If not for the fact that a preferred candidate won, we're grateful that the insanity of the election season is over. Or then we have to ask ourselves, is it? And I think that answer is not yet present. Hopefully we will see soon that the election is over. I will be speculating a little bit into the realm of the political because it profoundly impacts on our lives, on our culture, the nature of this democracy, the lives of our children, and our future. But first, I want to look at the biblical narrative, and I want to struggle with it because it deserves that. It deserves for us to be able to look more deeply into it and see what it teaches us. There are not many stories in the Torah that feature Isaac, Yitzchak. In fact, there's very little. However, we all read of a traumatic moment when Yitzchak gives his blessing. We read that Yitzchak is visually impaired and even lying on his deathbed. He offers to bless his son Esau and to give him the birthright once he brings him game to eat. However, encouraged by his mother's deception, Jacob stands before his father, wearing his brother Esau's clothes and animal skins on his arms, imitating Esau. And while Jacob is aware that he is assuming a dishonest role, he participates in the deception as if he will be able to pass the guilt of his own morally corrupt action onto his mother. As Jacob approaches, Isaac asks him, "Who are you?" And when Jacob claims to be Esau, Isaac comments, "The hands belong to Esau, but the voice belongs to Yaakov," to Jacob. It's abundantly clear that Isaac knows that this cannot be Esau. He even asks Yaakov to reconfirm his false identity. It seems that his physical blindness becomes a willful blindness to the dishonesty and the deception that's surrounding him. Isaac can no longer look away when, having given Esau's blessing to Jacob, Esau comes in with game, hoping to receive the blessing as well. And Isaac is unable to cope with the truth that is then revealed to him. Esau asserts his place as the firstborn and his right to the blessing, unaware of the deception of his mother and his brother in the complicity of his father. And we read that Isaac was seized with very violent trembling. Hardly surprising. Imagine a moment in your own life where you find that your family's animosity was such that everyone was lying to you. The commentators note that there's a deeper disease that's being expressed in this scene. The Midrash asserts that Isaac trembled twice in his life. First, when his father Abraham tried to kill him on the altar, prepared to sacrifice him on Mount Moriah. And we learn that then Yitzchak trembled. And we learn also he trembles at this moment, the moment we're discussing. And the commentators ask the question, which trembling was more profound? Unanimously, and actually surprisingly, the answer that they give is this story of him being deceived of his blessing is more traumatic. This emotional wave of fear causes him to tremble, what the text says, ad me'od. The Hebrew words are translated as exceedingly. But we know me'od, the Hebrew word for very, refers specifically to something that is core, something very, very deep. A person can be tov me'od, and we know they're very good. But I think we understand it even better from the Shema, from V'ahavta, where we are to love God b'chol me'odecha, and that is with all of our being, with everything that we've got. Rashi evokes a very powerful image in his commentary. Rashi quotes a midrash saying that at that moment of trembling, Yitzchak saw hell, Gehenna, opening before him. How could Isaac find this moment even more painful than when he was bound to the altar by his own father? In our tradition, rarely invokes an image of hell. So why does it do it here? Perhaps the answers are found in the symbolism of Esau. That is, in rabbinic literature, Esau represents Rome, as I mentioned earlier, the empire that conquers the Jewish people and desecrated our holy places and destroyed the temple. In this passage, we can discern the roots of our conflict with the civilization that surrounded and dominated us. I often wonder, did the rabbis have to make this connection in order to be able to justify the deception? Isn't the issue fundamentally a lack of honesty in the biblical family? Esau and Jacob maneuver and deceive rather than attempting to interact truthfully. And their game offers a lesson for today. The greatest threat to our civilization may be in a failure to communicate honestly in an open way, combined with an unwillingness to listen to another. This day, hatred and lies run rampant in our world, and I fear too many have become accustomed to it, and so they find it accepting. I would say, like Yitzchak, we should tremble when there is lying. We should scream loudly at the repression of truth. Thursday night, a group of us reviewed an exceptional documentary about the life of a man named Bassem Youssef. Bassem Youssef was an Egyptian cardiologist who became a popular sensation around the time of the Arab Spring. And he became a comedian, first on the internet, and then he was offered a television program using satire and humor in order to stand up to power and tyranny and lies and the lack of a free press. He first did it in response to President Mubarak, a military dictator, And then he continued in response to President Morsi, a religious fundamentalist, a representative of the Muslim Brotherhood. And then he continued in response to President Sisi, another military general, all of whom stomped on human rights and the freedom of the press, the freedom of expression. Ultimately, Yusuf was targeted and he had to leave Egypt, and he did so, and he's safe. He has a podcast now from Los Angeles. He spent time in Cambridge teaching at the Kennedy School at Harvard. His television program was shut down and he and his family were threatened, all while there was the trampling of the freedom of the press and freedom of expression. All of this in the midst of big lies. My concern, however, at this moment is us, our nation. I read a report that was published on Wednesday that 50% of Americans believe in the lie that Trump won the election. That came after Christopher Krebs, who was the head of cybersecurity, a man of great respect and renown. He was the head of cybersecurity for the election. He stated that this was the most secure election in the history of our nation. Joe Biden is the president-elect. Christopher Krebs, an outstanding public service, a brilliant security expert, appointed by a Republican, a man with great credentials, a servant to fairness and honesty, was fired by the president because he dared to confront the lie, because he spoke the truth. I'm deeply concerned about the truth. Why? For one is, we have a tradition that has tremendous disdain for lying. I go to this area now with this conversation because I fear that the lies perpetuated, not just by the leadership of the country, but online media outlets, and the lack of control of the internet, sees a perpetuation of lies and conspiracy theories that endanger us, our future, our children's world. I've been reading about QAnon and its threat to truth and freedom. It's based on lies. It's an international conspiracy theory with hundreds of thousands of followers. It's very dangerous. And with the prevailing lies, there's a refusal for the necessity of a transition to the next administration. 50% of his followers believe in a lying leader. National security and the dangers of COVID will be compromised. And all the work that needs to be done will be threatened. Lying leaders threaten democracy. Our own safety as Jews, as a minority, is compromised when democracy is compromised. So how is it compromised? Well, I mentioned this last week in a letter that I wrote to the congregation. The Greek thinkers who gave the world the concept and the ideas and the ideals of democracy knew what would make it strong, and they knew what would destroy democracy. The Greek philosophers were very concerned about truth telling as it applied to all different systems, be it in the family or in the communal systems or in the nation. They, like the rabbis, understood that there were times that truth had to be bent. Like the rabbis who asked the question, what do we say to an ugly bride? And you know this one. We tell the bride that she is beautiful. It's a no-brainer. It's called a white lie. No foul, no harm, or no harm, no foul. But typically lying is much more insidious. The philosophers recognized liars and they understood how dangerous they were to democracy. They had a word for what we might call compulsive liars. They referred to something that they called a lie in the soul. That is a lie, according to Plato, that's so deeply ingrained that one who lies believes it. And he's able to convince those around him that it's true. It's the lie of the narcissist. And so the lie grows, and then there are swaths of the population that also believe it. And what we see is that the lies are perpetrated by friends around the table and news outlets, and democracy then falls. This happens with charismatic leaders and leads to confusion and destruction. This was the concern of the thinkers, the philosophers, and the leaders who gave democracy to the world. It should be our concern. It's my concern. And we need to work against it. We need to teach civics. We need to teach civility. We need to teach about truth-telling. We need to control the media outlets in a way that makes them responsible for truth. We need to work for truth in reporting, for journalism with integrity, journalism where the journalists have freedom. Our journalists are the ones who hold public officials accountable. They're willing to speak truth to power. When Khashoggi was murdered in Turkey, and then his body was cut to bits, and the Saudis were given a free pass, freedom in our world took a hit. We can't allow those types of things to happen, and we have the power. We're not going to stop the murder, but we have the power to respond appropriately to the murder of a great journalist. You know what I'd like to do here at B'nai Torah? I'd like us to establish an annual lecture that features a journalist who speaks to truth, a journalist who will speak to power, a journalist that will affirm democracy. And as smart people, we have to learn to engage differently with the internet. We have to look for the work and the reporting from respectable think tanks and journals and universities, the bastion of free thinking. The Hebrew word for truth is emet. Emet has 3 letters. The first is aleph. The middle is mem. The last is taf. These are the middle, the first, the middle, and the last letter of the alphabet. The word teaches that truth is the foundation of everything in human relations. The world rests on truth. The prophet Jeremiah went even further. He said, Adonai el emet. God is truth. These words are recited when we say the vidui on our dying beds. God is the God of truth. God is truth. We can accept nothing less. And so as we look at Parashat Toldot, and we see how deception and lying led to enmity between peoples that has lasted thousands and thousands of years, let's just consider that truth is a better option. Let's just think about the fact that openness, a willingness to have fair debate with honesty is a better option. Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We'll continue with the Chatzi Kaddish on page 155.